His hand hovered over his holster, his accusation slicing through the air. A car like this? It's not yours. He saw an easy arrest. What he didn't see was the judge who would ultimately decide his fate. The accusation hung in the humid afternoon air of the Grove at Valencia Creek, as sharp and out of place as shattered glass on a marble floor. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am." Dr. Evelyn Reed, 35, ended her call. The Chief Justice's concerned voice cut short. She turned slowly, her vintage leather satchel sliding from the passenger seat of the gleaming 1969 Mercedes-Benz 280 SL. Its silver paint, the color of a winter sky, seemed to absorb the opulent surroundings. The distant chime of a luxury watch boutique, the faint scent of designer perfume drifting from a nearby storefront. Officer Kyle Novak approached, his posture a study in aggressive certainty. His 12 years on the force had honed his instincts, or so he believed. What he saw was a simple, infuriating equation. A young black woman in casual but elegant attire next to a classic car worth more than his house. The numbers didn't compute. "I know for a fact you didn't buy this car," he stated, his voice loud enough to turn heads. Shoppers paused, their curiosity piqued. A young man with a sketchbook, his hair dyed electric blue, discreetly raised his phone. Leo, an art student, recognized the scene of raw, uncomfortable tension when he saw one. He hit go live. "Place your hands on the hood," Novak commanded, his hand now resting firmly on his holstered weapon. Evelyn complied, her movements measured and deliberate. The warmth of the sun-baked metal felt like a brand against her skin. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at her composure, but years of judicial training had built a fortress of calm around her emotions. "Officer," she began, her voice even, "if you'll just let me explain. This vehicle matches the description of a car stolen 2 nights ago." He lied, inventing a pretext to justify his stop. A classic Mercedes. Silver. He circled the car like a shark, his eyes cataloging every detail as evidence of her guilt. "This car is a collector's item. It's worth more than you'll make in a decade. So let's cut the act." The livestream viewer count on Leo's phone ticked upward. 521, 974, 1,532. Comments began to flood the screen. Evelyn's phone, lying on the passenger seat, buzzed again. Chief Justice Davies. The emergency judicial conference was in session. A landmark case on police accountability hung in the balance, deadlocked at 4-4. Her vote was the tiebreaker. The irony was a bitter pill. "I'm going to need to see registration and proof of purchase," Novak said, his tone dripping with condescension. "And I'm going to need you to empty your pockets on the hood." Slowly, the crowd was now a semicircle of silent witnesses. Phones were out, a constellation of small black mirrors reflecting the unfolding drama. Evelyn saw their faces, some sympathetic, some merely curious, all captivated by the public spectacle. She was an exhibit, a diorama of presumed guilt. The environment she moved through with ease every day, the world of law, order, and respect, had vanished, replaced by this crude, baseless theater of prejudice on hot asphalt. The wail of a siren, brief and perfunctory, announced the arrival of backup. A patrol car pulled up, and 2 officers emerged. The first was Sergeant Miller, a man whose weary posture spoke of 25 years on the job. The second was Officer Anya Sharma, younger, her expression sharp and cautious. She took in the scene. The pristine classic car, the well-dressed black woman, Novak's aggressive stance, and the ring of phone-wielding onlookers, and her body tensed. "What have we got, Kyle?" Miller asked, his eyes scanning the crowd with practiced indifference. "Potential grand theft auto, Sarge," Novak announced, puffing out his chest. "Subject is uncooperative. Claims the car is hers, but can't provide any documentation." The lie was so blatant, so effortless, that Evelyn felt a chill despite the heat. He hadn't even given her a chance to produce anything. "Ma'am," Miller said, his tone more procedural than aggressive, "we just need to clear this up. If you have the paperwork, we can all be on our way." "The documents are in my satchel, on the passenger seat," Evelyn stated, her gaze unwavering. Novak moved toward the car door. "I'll retrieve it." "No." Evelyn's voice was suddenly sharp, cutting through the air with an authority that made even Miller pause. "That satchel contains privileged legal documents. You do not have the right to search it without a warrant." Novak scoffed. "Privileged documents? Ma'am, if you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem." He turned to Miller. "She's obstructing." Classic stall tactic. Officer Sharma shifted uncomfortably. She had seen Novak operate before. His instincts always seemed to fire when the subject was a person of color. She subtly angled her body camera to ensure it captured a clear view of the interaction, a small act of professional dissent. Evelyn's mind was a whirlwind of legal calculus. She could feel the weight of her father's legacy, the man who had driven this very car, Judge Marcus Reed. He had taught her that the law was a shield, but that sometimes you had to stand perfectly still to use it. Any sudden move for her bag could be misconstrued as reaching for a weapon. Her silence was her only defense. Inside, she was a storm of frustration. The missed calls from the Chief Justice felt like a ticking clock. The police accountability bill, a bill she had helped draft, a bill designed to prevent exactly this kind of profiling, was waiting for her vote. Her own humiliation was now intertwined with the fate of thousands who depended on that legislation. "That's it. I'm done playing games." Novak snapped, his patience a theatrical performance for his colleagues, now exhausted. He unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, be advised, subject is refusing a lawful search. We may have a 10 to 15 situation here." He was escalating, building a narrative for the report, painting her as a resistant suspect. Miller sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. This was getting messy. The media would have a field day. "Kyle, let's just slow down." But Novak was past listening. He saw a challenge to his authority, and in his world, such challenges had to be crushed publicly and decisively. He took a step toward Evelyn, his hand moving from his gun to the taser on his belt. The crowd gasped. Leo's phone trembled in his hand. The viewer count shot past 20,000. The silent standoff was about to erupt into violence. "Officer, stop. You don't know who that is." The voice, frail but firm, came from the edge of the crowd. An elderly woman with elegant silver hair and eyes that held a lifetime of wisdom pushed her way forward. Ms. Eleanor Vance, retired for 5 years, but a legendary figure at the county courthouse for 40, recognized the calm, intelligent face of Dr. Reed. "Ma'am, step back now." Novak barked, not even bothering to look at her. "This is official police business." He turned back to Evelyn, his hand now firmly on his taser. "Final chance. Put your hands behind your back." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Just then, a white news van from a local station screeched into the parking lot, its cameraman jumping out before the vehicle had even stopped. They picked up Leo's viral live stream. The situation was spiraling, but for Novak, it was a point of no return. His pride was on the line. He thumbed the safety off his taser. The distinct click was audible in the sudden silence. And then, another sound cut through the tension, a crackle from the radio on Sergeant Miller's shoulder. "All units, be on the lookout. We have a report from the Chief Justice's office. Supreme Court Judge Evelyn Reed is currently unreachable. She was en route to the emergency judicial conference. Last seen driving a vintage silver Mercedes, license plate MRED1. She is considered a high-priority individual. I repeat, be on the lookout for Judge Evelyn Reed." The world seemed to stop. The color drained from Novak's face. Sergeant Miller stared at the Mercedes license plate, MRED1. He then looked at the composed, dignified woman standing before them, the woman his officer was about to tase. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. He had testified in her courtroom. He had seen her in robes, sitting elevated on the bench, a figure of immense power. Without the gavel and the formal setting, he hadn't recognized her. "Kyle." Miller's voice was a choked whisper. "Put away." But Novak was frozen, his mind refusing to process the cataclysmic reality. In that moment of stunned silence, Evelyn spoke, her voice calm and clear, yet carrying the weight of the entire judicial system. "Officers," she said, her eyes locked on Novak. "I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding. I will now retrieve my identification from my satchel. I suggest you do not interfere." She turned, her movements slow and deliberate, and reached through the open window of her father's car. The crowd held its breath. The news camera zoomed in. Over 50,000 people watched on Leo's live stream as her hand emerged from the vintage leather satchel, holding not a weapon, but a small, leather-bound ID case. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Evelyn opened the case with a soft, definitive snap. Inside, the gold seal of the state Supreme Court gleamed under the afternoon sun. The words were stark and irrefutable. "The Honorable Dr. Evelyn Reed, Justice of the Supreme Court." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. On Leo's live stream, the comments section exploded into an unreadable cascade of shock and outrage. Ms. Vance, the retired clerk, simply smiled, a look of profound vindication on her face. Officer Novak stood as if turned to stone, the taser still in his hand, now looking like a cheap toy. The entire foundation of his reality, his assumptions, his authority, his career, had just crumbled into dust. "Officer Kyle Novak," Evelyn said, her voice devoid of anger, but imbued with a chilling, absolute authority. "Badge number 714. You have made a grave error." She closed the ID case. "You did not see a citizen. You saw a stereotype. You acted not on evidence, but on prejudice." Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his face pale. "Your Honor, I apologize. We had no idea." "That is precisely the problem, Sergeant," Evelyn countered, her gaze sweeping over all three officers. "You had no idea because you did not bother to ask. You chose to accuse." She paused, letting the weight of her identity sink in. Then, she delivered the next blow. "Perhaps you're not aware, Officer Novak, that in addition to my duties on the bench, I am the chair of the state's Police Accountability and Reform Committee." If Novak's face had been white before, it was now translucent. The woman he had just profiled, humiliated, and threatened was the very person who oversaw the conduct of every police officer in the state. "Your precinct," she continued, her voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel, "has a 34% higher stop and search rate for black drivers compared to the county average, despite contraband being found 28% less often. Your personal record, Officer Novak, includes 18 excessive force complaints, 4 of which resulted in civil lawsuits settled quietly by the city. The total cost to taxpayers for your conduct to date is $417,000. She wasn't just a judge. She was a walking database of his failures. She knew his history better than he did. This wasn't just a dressing down. It was a professional autopsy performed live for the world to see. How could you know that?" he stammered. "It's my job to know," Evelyn replied flatly. "I review departmental data quarterly. I approve the settlements. Your name, Officer Novak, has crossed my desk more times than any other officer in your precinct." The news reporter, Jennifer Martinez, pushed her microphone forward. "Your Honor, can you give us a statement on what this means?" "This," Evelyn said, turning to the camera, her voice now projecting to a national audience, "is a textbook example of systemic bias. It is what happens when implicit prejudice is allowed to fester within law enforcement, unchecked by meaningful oversight. It is a violation of the badge, a violation of the public trust, and a violation of the United States Constitution." Officer Sharma looked at the ground, her face a mixture of shame and validation. She had known Novak was a problem. Now, the highest judicial authority in the state was confirming it. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted with the force of a tidal wave. Novak was no longer the accuser. He was the accused, standing in the dock of a parking lot before a judge he could not appeal. Sirens screamed again, but this time they heralded the arrival of the top brass. A black SUV pulled to a halt, and Police Chief Morrison stepped out. His face was a mask of grim determination. He was a man known for his commitment to reform, a reputation now facing its most public test. His first glance was not at his officers. but at the elderly woman standing proudly in the crowd. He nodded at her with a look of deep respect. Ms. Eleanor Vance was his mother. Judge Reed, the chief said, his voice resonating with authority and sincere apology. On behalf of my entire department, I am appalled. There is no excuse for what happened here. There isn't, Chief, Evelyn agreed. But this goes beyond a simple apology. She held his gaze and then delivered the final, devastating piece of information. The emergency conference I was forced to miss today, we were voting on a federal civil rights lawsuit. Case number CV 24-9812. The defendant was Officer Kyle Novak. The air crackled. Novak looked as if he'd been physically struck. The case he thought was buried in legal limbo was being decided by the very woman he had just tried to arrest. So, we're not just dealing with a violation of my rights, Evelyn continued, her voice cold and clear. We are dealing with a direct and catastrophic conflict of interest created by your officer's prejudice. Chief Morrison's jaw tightened. He understood immediately. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a legal and financial time bomb for the city. Therefore, Evelyn said, turning her attention back to the trembling officer, I am offering you a choice, Officer Novak. Your decision will not only define the rest of your life, but will also set a precedent for police reform in this state. The parking lot fell silent. The live stream, now with over 90,000 viewers, was a quiet river of anticipation. Option 1, she began, ticking it off on her finger. You are immediately suspended. You will face a full federal investigation under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. You will likely face criminal charges, you will be fired, and you will lose your pension. You will have your day in court, but I assure you, the evidence is not in your favor. Novak swayed on his feet. Option 2. You accept a voluntary and immediate demotion to a desk job. You will complete 200 hours of intensive, in-person bias and de-escalation training, conducted by community leaders. And you will testify, under oath, before the state legislature about your actions and the dangers of racial profiling, serving as a public case study for reform. The crowd murmured. It was a path to redemption, but a deeply humiliating one. Option 3. You retire, effective immediately. You will keep your full pension, but you will sign a legally binding agreement that you will never again work in any capacity in law enforcement or private security. You walk away, and this ends here. She looked at her watch. You have 60 seconds to decide, Officer Novak. Your choice is final and binding. The countdown began, each second stretching into an eternity. Novak's entire life, his identity as a cop, his family's security, his future, was balanced on this single decision. He looked at his hands, at the taser still hanging from his belt, at the faces in the crowd. He saw not a mob, but a jury. 30 seconds, Evelyn announced, her voice unwavering. Chief Morrison placed a hand on Novak's shoulder. Son, he said quietly, think very carefully. Novak's breath hitched. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. The arrogant officer was gone, replaced by a broken man facing the consequences of his own prejudice. I choose option 2. Novak choked out, his voice barely a whisper. I'll do it. I'll accept the demotion. I'll testify. A wave of stunned silence, followed by a ripple of applause, spread through the crowd. On the live stream, which had now crested 100,000 viewers, comments of disbelief and hope flooded the screen. An officer choosing accountability over escape was a rare and powerful sight. Judge Reed gave a single, sharp nod. A wise decision, Mr. Novak. She then turned to Chief Morrison, reaching in her satchel one last time. She produced a neatly folded document. This is a memorandum of understanding, she announced, handing a copy to the chief and another to the news crew. I drafted it on my way here. It outlines specific, non-negotiable reforms your department will begin implementing within 90 days. The reforms were sweeping. Mandatory body cameras for every officer with footage subject to review by a civilian board. Quarterly immersive bias training conducted by civil rights experts. And a public-facing data portal tracking traffic stops to identify discriminatory patterns. "This incident will not be in vain, Chief," Evelyn stated. "It will be the catalyst for change." 6 months later, the ripples of that afternoon had become a tidal wave. Kyle Novak, his face etched with a humility he had never known, stood before the state legislature. His testimony was raw and powerful. "I saw a black woman with an expensive car, and I saw a crime," he confessed. "My prejudice blinded me to the truth." His story was instrumental in passing Senate Bill 421, the Judicial Integrity and Police Reform Act. Dr. Evelyn Reed established the Marcus Reed Foundation for Judicial Equity, a nonprofit dedicated to mentoring and funding young lawyers of color. Its motto, taken from her father's teachings, became a national rallying cry: evidence over assumption, character over color, justice over prejudice. Leo, the art student, won a prestigious journalism scholarship for his live footage. He now works as an investigative reporter, using his platform to expose injustice. Ms. Eleanor Vance was appointed the first civilian chair of the county's new police oversight board, her decades of wisdom now shaping policy. The Grove at Valencia Creek installed community-led security oversight panels, becoming a model for corporate responsibility. The equation of prejudice, black person plus valuable object equals crime, was being actively unlearned in training rooms across the state, replaced by a new one. Accountability plus reform equals justice. Evelyn still drives the 1969 Mercedes. Every Saturday, she takes it for a drive, the smooth rumble of the engine a connection to her father's legacy and a reminder of her own resilience. That parking lot became a classroom, a place where a moment of profound humiliation was transformed into a lesson for an entire nation. The incident proved that when we witness injustice, we have a choice. We can remain silent, or we can demand the accountability that forges real, lasting change. Your voice is a critical part of this ongoing fight. Share your own stories of overcoming prejudice respectfully in the comments below. What changes do you want to see happen in your community? Subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. Hit that notification bell, because every story shared, every voice raised, brings us one step closer to a world where our character is all that matters.